Oh, this must be the podcast.
I think, for a lot of people, a true liberal is someone who probably, is agnostic to atheists. Agnostic probably at best on the religious spectrum. And, whereas I'm a Catholic. And I see a lot of Catholics that say you can't be a Democrat and Catholic. And it's like, well, I'm going to disagree with you because of the Jesuits. and right?
Hello, everybody. You should know that I recorded this episode before the election, when both me and my guest didn't think that a Trump victory was possible. But before we get into politics, let me introduce you to my friend, the Marvelous Patric. I think I always mispronounce your name. I always want to say Lewandowski, and it should be Lewandowski, right?
Yeah. Lewandowski.
Lewandowski. Okay. And the other thing is, what do you consider yourself, a cartoonist or what?
Yeah, I would consider myself a cartoonist by nature.
And what made you go into that?
Yeah, when you say it like that, it's like I had a choice. I always was fascinated with comics as a kid, and I don't know, it's kind of one of those things that, like, I don't draw particularly well, but I always really like superheroes, but I would never be able to draw like a superhero comic. But like, I could do a comic strip. So I think it was kind of a thing where it's like, this is literally the least I can do and still be comic adjacent. And then also I think my sense of humor tends to lend itself very well. Like if I'm not funny, like there's always another day to be funny. So like if you don't score today, there's always the next one.
Patric and I used to teach together at the same school. And at the time, he was doing a strip called Fun Factory.
It started out its life actually as a pitch for Adult Swim with a friend of mine. Fun Factory was very offensive. It's full frontal nudity, very raunchy humor, and and so it was stylistically, vocally, it's very just different voice and everything. And I'd had this, because it started as an Adult Swim pitch. And after languishing, because Adult Swim, they went and developed Super Jail actually at the same instead of Fun Factory, which I think is a fantastic show. So good choice. And because they're two moderately Wonka-y, meaning that they're kind of both Willy Wonka-inspired shows, it made sense that you can't have two of those on that tiny little 15-minute network. So for
those who don't know, what is the basic premise of Fun Factory?
So Fun Factory is about, it's basically Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but I want to say like a more cynical or perhaps realistic point of view on that one. And it's the 10-year-old wins the contest to become CEO of a toy factory. But you have to ask yourself, why would a multinational company allow a 10-year-old child to be in charge? And the only good reason there could possibly be is that there's antitrust issues with the DOJ, and they need some sort of legal shield, because there's no way even the Department of Justice could go after a 10-year-old and not look like monsters. So it's just your basic PR stunt. Like I said, it's cynical, and the whole thing was really it was a very mean send-up of capitalism, kind of like this is like the worst of capitalism. Right, where everyone is only out for profit at any cost. There's no one that is decent in the entire factory. And there's 10-year-old kids being used. There's illegal immigrant workers who are being abused by the rich white people that own the place. And I did it for about 5 years.
Fun Factory was full color and very time consuming, especially as Patric's family grew, and he had less time to devote to his artwork. After playing around with some different ideas, Patric returned to a black and white comic he had previously put aside, Freaks and Squeaks.
And obviously, we're going to want to talk about Freaks and Squeaks, so, because when we talked about me coming on tonight, we should talk about the election,
right?
The infamous election, and there's a reason why this all kind of comes, because there obviously is a political bend to a lot of my comics, because I like politics. It's like my sports. I don't like sports, but I like to follow politics. The good, the bad, the ugly. I'm interested in the story of it. And Freaks and Squeaks. So I learned it started off always being moderately political, and here we are again in this beautiful political season. So it seems like not a bad idea to bring it back actually in time for that. And really, honestly, Donald Trump was like one of the very first. Has been since it's come back in non-sketch form this year. It's basically all been Donald Trump stuff. So I think maybe I'm like Berkeley breathed. He brought back Bloom County largely, to kind of make fun of Trump, and because when I started Freaks and Squeaks back in college in 2002, like one of the very first storylines. Well, I should back up. Freaks and Squeaks is about mice that live in a little boy's bedroom. That's right. The high concept. It's just a satire of humanity, but with mice. But I'm drawing right now while we're talking. I'm actually working on the 1965th strip ever.
Wow.
And so over the course of that time, I mean, it's Simpson-esque in its cast. There's a lot of little bit characters and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, but mice are disposable. You can easily kill them. There's always more. Is kind of the beauty of it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's some main characters obviously, but like the Simpsons. I mean, there's definitely a Simpsons influence. I've been watching the Simpsons with my stepson, and then Animaniacs and Tiny Toons with my daughters, and it's like, oh, this is where my sense of humor comes from. It's these shows. So it's about these mice live in a little boy's bedroom, but it's really a satire of pop culture and humanity. And one of the very first stories was there was a boy genius mouse, and he gets invited by the mouse government, the Prez Tex, who's a very thin. Doesn't even really thin is almost too well of a would be too much hiding. Thinly veiled George W. Bush caricature. And he gets invited by Tex, the Prez, and the mice because he's a boy genius, and they're worried that the mice trap in the room across the hall from theirs are building mouse traps of mass destruction. Again, it's 2002.
Right.
And so his thing he wants him to do is build a better mouse trap. Ha ha ha. This is hey, for a 22-year-old, I feel like that's a pretty solid joke. I feel like 14 years ago, that was a pretty solid joke. So there's always been a political bend to this. And like I said, so now here we are, here's Trump, and I'm not really proud of it, but I give them like moderately fakey names. Like you can tell who it is. Like it's a real wink at the camera kind of names. Like instead of Trump, we have the Trump mouse is Ronald Blump, which I think is a really actually, I think Blump is just, it sounds so bad. I won't lie. But yeah, I mean, so now I'm back doing these funny little mouse comics, but it is different in that my format has changed. It used to be like a horizontal strip, because that's the shape comic strips were. And nowadays I'm all about social media. So because of that, it's like, well, everything on social media is square. So I'm doing my strips as squares. So I have them on my Twitter and my Instagram for all my followers and Facebook and all that. And that's where it is now. So I mean that's kind of the big difference. Is it used to be web comics and everything was on the web, but now the website is really just a place for an archive to live. The comic itself, it's on social media.
Right.
I am not unproud of my Twitter. To quote someone. to quote some guy.
In many ways, Patrick and I are very different. While I was proud to count myself as part of the 23% who still approved of President Bush when he left office, Patrick drove a Prius with an Obama-Biden sticker on it. But we're also a lot alike. We're both reasonable with a good sense of humor, and we both want to see a more civil, more thoughtful, less divided America. So, how would you describe your politics? Communist?
Well, like anyone who happens to be even a hair left of center, I'm clearly 100% communist.
Right.
I would say personally I'm liberal, but I'm also probably a bit more pragmatic. Like during the primary, I would say, well, my heart says Bernie Sanders, but my head says Hillary Clinton because she'll get something done. She will make things happen, right? Where Bernie, it's like, okay, these there's all this gridlock in Washington for all these years because Obama was too liberal, and Bernie Sanders is to the left of Obama by quite a bit. What do these people think he's going to get done?
Right.
And I don't know if that's just me being older now and less idealistic, but I don't really think I'm less idealistic. I'm liberal, but like I said, I have probably a pragmatic sense of it, but I don't want to say I think, liberal also conjures up a definitive image for a lot of people. And I think this is part of the problem is, right, the phrase liberal or in the term conservative, there are things you must be and do in order to be those labels. And if you're not a, and this is the thing that really pisses me off, is you're not a true liberal, you're not a true conservative, or you're not a true Republican and not a true Democrat. And I think any moment anyone says that I don't think anyone should be able to say that someone else is not a true anything, right? I don't think that's completely fair because I think these things are bigger than a lot of us, and I think things are also, they change over time, and what, Obi-Wan Kenobi wisely said to Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, the truth depends on your point of view from time to time, meaning things can change, especially in terms of politics. And so I think, for a lot of people, a true liberal is someone who probably, is agnostic to atheist, agnostic probably at best on the religious spectrum, and whereas I'm a Catholic, and I see a lot of Catholics who say you can't be a Democrat and Catholic, and it's like, well, I'm going to disagree with you because of the Jesuits. And right, it's and because it just kind of depends on what your personal interest is, and I don't think it's okay to say you can only be one thing or another. I think there's a lot of people say that all conservatives, have to be the evangelical bent of conservatism, when clearly that's not true. So religion is one spot. I think if the teams, referring to the parties, were really smart, the Democrats would build a religious left coalition, much like the religious right was built, because I think there are people out there that they could build that, such as myself, who would see what we often term as social justice issues as being a part of the religious aspect of liberalism, and people have food, shelter, healthcare, those sort of things provided to them by society, which many, such as myself, would take, say, well, there's clearly a biblical correlation for that in Jesus saying, tend my flock, feed my sheep. We are all the flock, we are all the sheep. But there's biblical arguments on either side. I'm not saying this one is right now. I'm saying, I think that there definitely is a spot for that. And, as far as evangelical right, well, clearly there's room, if you look at conservatism of being less government, more individualism, that sort of side of conservatism of, less government interference, that kind of people do their own thing, freedom, kind of like a less crazy libertarian. You would, in that case, well, yeah, then, obviously something like atheism, would have a place in the Republican tent, that you wouldn't need to be a Christian because, hey, if they don't choose to believe in this, or they don't, not a creationism, evolution, science, if that's their choice, so that's their life, they don't have to. There should be room for both of these. Again, it's the hot button issue of my lifetime in my neck of the woods. Obviously, abortion, right?
Right.
And I always dislike dichotomies of black or white, because it's pro-life / anti-abortion, or pro-choice / pro-abortion, depending on which side of the fence you're on that. And you see a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm pro-life," and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, but we got to have the death penalty." It's like, well, for my pro-life, my own personal the Marvelous Patric's pro-life stance would be, well, if we're going to be pro-life, okay, let's not have abortions, but let's not legally mandate it. Let's actually just try to solve the problem. Why do people have abortions? Well, they have an unwanted pregnancy, so maybe let's attack that part of it. And then, oh, hey, no death penalty, no war, things like that. So there's a very liberal piece of pro-life that could be used, but often gets overshadowed by reproductive right issues. And then on the other side, again, there's plenty of room for the conservative movement doesn't have to be necessarily pro-life / anti-choice, however you want to frame it, right? Because they could say, well, it's some again, the individual's choice, whatever, we don't like it, we can try to change the problem. Or they could say, okay, we're going to be pro-life and we're going to be peace, things like, so there's room to do it both ways. There's a lot of, I feel like, unexplored territory in the political spectrum, which, if I put this in my comics, these would be genuinely interesting comics, but I don't know how funny they would be.
Right. Why do you think that there's so much area that's unexplored in our politics?
It's not pretty. It's not easy. It's not sexy. We like the us versus them, two choices sort of thing. Yeah, we have multiple parties in this in our country, but the fact that that they don't get play, it's not a media conspiracy or anything else like that. It's just simply, when it comes down to it, the two major parties try to be moderately broad, and we've tried to separate out into conservative versus liberal, when in truth, it's obviously a spectrum. And if there was going to be a third party, instead of being a third party on the conservative side or liberal side again, there really should be a third party in the middle for the moderates, right. where most people, because they tend to lay moderate. When people are like, oh, I can't vote for so-and-so or so-and-so, and I'm going to vote for Gary Johnson. And they're like, you should vote libertarian too. I'm like, there's nothing in the libertarian platform I believe in. I applaud the people that do. That's great. I think they should, but that's not for me. Now, my personal beliefs align most closely with currently the Democratic Party.
Right.
So that's who I'm going to vote for. And there's people who I know are like me, who are like, my belief system is most closely aligned with the Republican Party. That's who I'm going to vote for, even if he is a big orange potato.
It doesn't seem as funny now that the big orange potato actually won. But I agree with Patric that it's still better to be optimistic than cynical.
People always be like, oh, he's going to win. What's he going to do? What are we going to do? I'm like, I said, he's not going to win. I said that right away for one simple reason. It's because I have faith in humanity. And it's not an easy thing. It sounds like a punchline. And I think sometimes the most serious things do sound like punchlines, because sometimes they are the most absurd, and we laugh at the absurd. But I truly did have faith in humanity in this case. And I attribute that to Conan O'Brien, weirdly enough. And Conan O'Brien, and I reminded a friend of mine of this, who was concerned very recently about things, and he was a fan of Conan's Tonight Show. We like Conan. See, again, sides, Conan or Jay, right? But on Conan's very last Tonight Show, and I'll never forget this so long as I live, I'll have amnesia. I'll wake up from a coma with amnesia, and I'll remember this. Conan said, "Don't be cynical." And he was saying this as, what many would describe as terrible, horrible circumstances having, happened to him in terms of, having this, his dream job basically taken away by some guy who said he didn't want it anymore, and this, that, and the other. But he said, "Hey, I got to achieve my dream, at least for a little while. It's okay. Everything's fine. This is not a real big problem." He goes, "Things are always going to work out. Don't be cynical." He goes, "Cynicism, well, no," he goes, "if you're cynical," I don't remember exactly what he said, but it's basically that when you're cynical, it's less fun to be right, but it's easier. Right. But and I think about what he says about don't be cynical, and the cynical thing would be to say everything is going wrong. This complete and utter bozo is going to become leader of the free world, and everyone's terrible and deplorable, or everyone's a communist, or right, or they those immigrants took our jobs, or it's easy to be cynical, and I don't like that, and I don't want to be that, and that's ultimately what it is I believed in humanity not because it came easily to me, but because I chose to. And I think that, going back to that whole faith thing, I think there comes a point with faith in anything, whether it's religious, science, or humanity, that faith is a choice. And you have to decide. I mean, if everything was going right for you, of course it's easy to believe. It's when things look like maybe this isn't going to work out that you have to make the choice to believe. And that's what I chose to do this time. I chose to believe that, and even if he did become president, I still believe that everything will be okay in the end. Because it may not seem like it, but I think it's better to believe that than to believe that everything is going to go horribly wrong. Right. I think I am an optimist by nature, and I think some people just aren't wired that way, and I think that's okay. I think again with politics, conservative, liberal, I think it's also part of who you are, who you're wired to be. Your life experiences shaped you. I don't like it if someone says, "I'm a blank. This is the right choice. This is the right choice for everyone." Only if I figured it out, you must, come on, I'm not that bright, and I figured out that it's the best to be, a liberal, and so therefore, if you don't, you must really be an idiot. Well, that's not helpful. Some people just aren't wired to be a liberal or a conservative or even political at all. Some people are very apolitical, and I married one of them. And that's the thing. You are who you are. You call it wiring, call it your soul, call it what have you. And that's the beauty of the world, is that we're all different and we get to be different. And that's why we can have religious liberals, and we can have non-religious conservatives, and we can have all these different things. That's what makes it wonderful, and that's why you can have bring it back to my comic. That's why I can have a comic that goes for over a decade with hundreds of little side characters and this, that, and the other, and all these little interests and stuff that pop up, and see where they go, because the world is wonderful, and if I'm going to satire the world, there's so much to work with.
Wow, I'm pleasantly surprised to hear your optimism, but if I can drag you out of that for just a bit.
Sure.
Why do we have Trump?
I've given it a lot of thought. Now, I know you've talked a lot about conspiracy theories and stuff on your podcast, and how they all, they are all a bunch of bollocks. And you're right, they are a bunch of bollocks. I think there's some people that say, he's a Democrat plant and this, that, and the other, or whatever. I was trying to think, who do we blame? Right? I mean, he is showing us the worst of ourselves, but honestly, you can't have a shadow without light.
Right.
And if this is the shadow of humanity, the light of humanity will be that much brighter for it. For the darkest shadows come from the brightest lights. It's, there's my optimism. And why do we have Trump? I think, and this is my own personal opinion, and I'm not an expert. I think this is going to be really controversial. Oh my gosh. I blame John McCain.
How so?
I thought about this. And, John McCain was running for president. And John McCain, I don't know, I want to say he still is. And I believe in his heart he is. I believe he had some weakness in his life. And I believe he's, but I think, he is an honorable man. And in one of his moments of weakness that we all have, because we're all people and no one is perfect, he agreed to the extremist part of his party who said, hey, you should take this woman from Alaska to be your running mate. And the minute Sarah Palin got on the national stage, it legitimized an entire fringe. I don't believe Sarah Palin is, the best of what that party has to offer.
Right.
And I'm watching right now, and I lament the Republican Party. I say this as a Democrat. I lament it because there's so much, that could be, that it should be good and doing, and just like Democrats have so much potential to do good, but Sarah Palin comes out and she's woefully ignorant, and if she was a Democrat, she'd have been woefully ignorant, right? But she says the craziest things, and by putting her at that point, all these crazy things, well, she's a vice presidential candidate, and she's, it kind of comes into that speaking for us, and he's a Muslim, was, all this, that, and the other, and right away we start getting, those conspiracies, and she's egging it on, and I think, right away John McCain, I think, realized, this isn't good, because I remember during the 2008 campaign, at a point where clearly it had gotten out of control, he's at one of his own rallies, and John McCain is talking, and someone in the crowd yells out about Barack Obama, he's a Muslim. And McCain stops his stump speech, turns and addresses that person and says, no, ma'am, he's not. I've served with him. I'm telling you, he's a good man, and he's a Christian. And he got booed.
Yeah.
The people that came to see him booed him for being a decent human. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that was in Minnesota too.
It might, maybe that's even why it's so burned in my memory. It might have been because the convention was in Minnesota that year.
Right.
And, I think that to me is the moment that gave birth to Donald Trump, is when Sarah Palin, comes out, and she doesn't have to know facts or anything. It's all gotcha, and it's all, they're out to get you journalism, and, you have your opinion on a fact. I say the sky is blue. Well, my opinion is it's green. You can't differ. You have to tell to both sides. When it happens, it's laughable at first, but then all of a sudden you get to a guy saying, he's going to get to the bottom of this birth certificate question and this, that, and the other. And, Richard Nixon.
Yes.
Never would have been this guy. And, Richard Nixon was always kind of like the grand villain of American politics up until this point, But in a lot of ways, Richard Nixon, he did the wrong thing, but he took it like a man, and he resigned, and he did that so that the country would not, have to go through anything, and and sure, he got a pardon, out of Ford and this, that, and the other, but he cared about his country more than anything personal.
Right.
And again, Richard Nixon, I it's strange to go to the Richard Nixon as a heroic symbol well, but when he lost to Kennedy, there was ample grounds for him to challenge the results of the election.
Right.
And he didn't, because he did not want to put the country through that, right? When Al Gore, there was a court case. It was decided by the Supreme Court. But once that happened, he's like, well, court spoke. That's it. All right, we're done. Shrug, right? It used to be our team lost. Shrug, here we go. All right, let's see what happens. And now we don't have that shrug that we used to have. That, it used to be if you didn't like the election, well, you didn't like it. But, you lost that time. Okay, well, let's give them a try, see what happens, and maybe, it'll all work out, and you hope for the best. And, I say this as a guy who, for the first couple elections of his life didn't ever support a winning candidate because it was the Democrats and it was the George W. Bush years. So I had no idea what it was like to support a winner. But never once did it occur to me. God, I worked on the John Kerry campaign, right? I mean, I walked into the campaign office. There's a sign up that had like a little countdown days to victory, and I thought, who are we fooling? But shrug. Oh well, here we are, right? You accept the loss graciously. Here we are at the first debate, and Trump is all conspiracy, right? I mean, this guy is nothing but your conspiracy theories, and he's, you're gonna, and a simple yes or no question: are you going to accept the results of the election? And he starts talking about, I'm going to make America great again, no matter what it takes. And it's like, it's a yes or no question, and the answer is yes.
Right. And now he's just getting worse and worse with, everything is rigged before it's even happened.
Yeah. And, this is the danger of Donald Trump actually wasn't if he won. The real danger of Trump is that there were people that took him seriously. And that, when he talks about maybe one of you guys could take care of her, he's a mobster.
Yeah.
And now I'm going full partisan, and that's not cool, but he's also, he's a mobster, right? I mean, he's basically done everything but say, it's a wonderful country you have here. Shame if something would have happened to it if I'm not elected, Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even see that as partisan underneath the circumstances. I'm amazed that anybody's falling for this.
And like I said, John McCain, he kind of too little too late, and who's the first guy, of course, Trump turns on, this whole, right? This John, I like war heroes that aren't captured. Like, because right away Trump started going to Sarah Palin rallies and hanging out with her, and he basically took her audience.
Yeah.
And why did we have her? I mean, and I feel bad, like I said, because I think John McCain was a servant for this country. He's deeply patriotic.
I think Patric's point is a valid one. McCain didn't cause Trump, but he helped open the door to Trump's success. He helped legitimize the fringe and put good theater over good politics. But he wasn't alone in this. I voted for McCain, despite the clear deficiencies of his running mate, and helped hold the door open for a reality TV show president. In hindsight, however, I also feel there is blame to go around on the political left, which has long portrayed nearly every Republican as stupid, racist, and dangerous. Once the real thing came along, it was kind of like the boy who cried wolf. But maybe I'll discuss that with Patric in the future. In the meantime, be sure to check out Patric's work. So tell people where they can find your work.
You can follow me on Twitter at Marvelous Patric. There's never a K in Patrick. There's no K in Patrick, just like there's no crying in baseball. So Marvelous Patric on everything. Facebook.com/Marvelous Patric. Twitter.com/Marvelous Patric. Instagram users Marvelous Patric. That's where to find me. If you wanted to read Freaks and Squeaks, you can go to freaksandsqueaks.com for archive stuff. The first 7-ish years of Freaks and Squeaks is actually only available as ebooks now. So you do have to buy those. if you want to read the first 1,500 or so strips, which I highly recommend. And actually, the best way to do that, here's a huge plug, is to sponsor my Patreon at patreon.com/Marvelous Patric. How do I come up with this? For $1 a month, you get all the ebooks. And so, as well as you get the comics early and the sketches and behind the scenes, and that's probably where to find me. I do post a lot of stuff on my Twitter and Instagram. Besides the comics, I'm pretty active on Twitter, and occasionally, because I do stand up, I might post some. I make like little memes of myself with some of my jokes, or sometimes like video from doing stand up. I might post that too.
Thank you for listening to This Must Be the Podcast. Our host is James K. Lambert. Our music was composed by Steve Yeager, and I'm the announcer, Keith Kopatz. This Must Be the Podcast is a JamesKLambert.com production.
I want to thank everybody who has taken the time to check out This Must Be the Podcast. This will be the final episode of 2016, but I promise to pick it back up again next year, and hopefully get on a more regular schedule. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, and all that. Remember, don't let yourself give in to cynicism.
I don't remember exactly what he said, but basically that when you're cynical, it's less fun to be right, but it's easier.